We continue our focus on the DRC crisis, and we've seen international leaders calling for renewed dialogue between Rwanda and the DRC. But there's no indication that the DRC is willing to pursue a diplomatic solution over a military one, despite the fall of Goma. Now, Turkish officials offered to mediate the conflict between the DRC and Rwanda during a summit between Turkish President Recep Tayyip Erdoğan and Rwandan President Paul Kagame on the 25th of January. But the DRC declined. In fact, DRC President Félix Tshisekedi dropped out of an emergency video conference with Kagame to be mediated by Kenyan President William Ruto in the East African community on the 29th of January. So this morning, we'll focus on South Africa's role and intervention in the DRC. And joining us virtually to discuss this is political analyst and head of the African Futures and Innovation at the Institute for Security Studies, Jakkie Cilliers. Mr. Cilliers, a very good morning to you. Thanks for joining us. Welcome to Morning Live.
Good morning. Thank you very much for inviting me.
It's an absolute pleasure, sir. Now, first of all, 14 South African soldiers lost already in the Eastern DRC conflict, and many questions asked about South Africa's involvement there. What really motivates South Africa to participate in the SADC mission's peacekeeping efforts, and how does this align with South Africa's foreign policy objectives and its role at the African Union?
So South Africa has been involved in trying to mediate and bring peace to the DR Congo for a very, very long time, going back to the Sun City Accords by former President Thabo Mbeki, support to peacekeeping, to elections, support to peacekeeping through the United Nations, etc. So it's a long-standing engagement, and we've also been active participants in the various United Nations peacekeeping missions in the DRC. But South Africa is generally perceived to be sort of in alignment with the government of President Tshisekedi because, well, the DRC is an important member of SADC.
Yes.
And the situation has now deteriorated because the mission of SAMI DRC, the SADC mission in the DRC, is a mission that is an offensive mission that is meant to bring stability and oust the M23, the Tutsi rebel movement in the eastern DRC that is supported by Rwanda. And this Rwanda now sees as an offensive operation directed at its security interests. And Rwanda has got particular security interests in the eastern DRC that go back to 1994 from the genocide in Rwanda, when a number of Hutus fled into the eastern DRC and now, of course, threaten the regime of President Paul Kagame from that part.
And Mr. Cilliers, it's quite interesting that you mention the security interest that Rwanda has in the DRC, because since the conflict began, President Kagame has repeatedly denied any involvement in supporting the M23 rebels, who are well-equipped, well-resourced and well-armed or trained. But, you know, this response has shifted as accusations continue to suffice. And well, the accusations continue to grow, of course, with overwhelming evidence showing Rwanda's support for the rebel group, with Richard Moncrief, the International Crisis Group's project director for the Great Lakes, saying that the tone has changed to justification for defensive measures. So since the blame now falls squarely on the shoulders of Kagame, what will this signal for him, Rwanda, and the consequences thereof?
Yeah, I think the evidence of Rwandan support to the M23 and their active forward deployment is overwhelming. There have been 6 UN missions that have in detail reported on Rwandan deployment in the eastern DRC. So I think that's beyond dispute. And I think even if you carefully read the exchange of messages between President Kagame and President Ramaphosa and public, you'll see that in actual fact, Rwanda, in a sense, is no longer denying its active involvement. It says, listen, it's for defense. And what is now interesting is the extent to which the M23 is advancing southward. So what is going to happen in terms of the future intentions of the M23? Reality is that there needs to be a diplomatic engagement. As you indicate, I think regional leaders are quite scared of President Kagame. He doesn't take any prisoners. He has lashed out at the chair of the Luanda peace process, at the chair of the Nairobi peace process. Him and President Félix Tshisekedi do not like one another. We've seen the way that he reacts against President Ramaphosa. But the region needs to come together, SADC and the East African community, with a common approach. You know, there are two peace processes, Luanda and Nairobi. Each one is considered to be in support of, well, different factions, the Rwanda and the DRC. There needs to be a single, common, unified approach. And of course, that at the end of the day needs to create a sense of rapprochement between the DRC and Rwanda. And Rwanda cannot indefinitely occupy and invade the eastern DRC in its security interests. But that requires that the DRC government re-establish its authority in the eastern DRC, and as it has repeatedly promised, neutralize the Hutu rebels, particularly the FDLR, and they were supposed to have been integrated into or demobilized Canton. That has not happened. The problem is that there is no government really in the eastern DRC. It's an area that is 1,700 kilometers from Kinshasa to the west, and it is economically much more closely integrated into the economies of Uganda, Rwanda, and to a lesser extent Burundi. So, and it's an informal economy. There are no clear borders and rebels that move freely across the border.
Okay. Now, just focusing on that conflict between President Kagame and Ramaphosa, well, whatever way you look at it, whether you look at it as a conflict or a tension or just a communication breakdown, so what does this conflict between the two leaders indicate about the broader political and security dynamics in the Great Lakes region? Could it possibly undermine efforts for peace and cooperation?
Yes, no, there's no doubt that this complicates the situation. President Ramaphosa tried to approach the issue in his normal conciliatory manner, but President Kagame just came back all guns blazing. And as I've said, the region, because Rwanda sort of behaves like the old mythology of Sparta in Greece. It's like a small muscular state, an authoritarian government that really throws its weight around. It has a formidable military, and the country, of course, has become something of a donor darling. So the countries that can really exert pressure on the Rwanda are the donors to Rwanda. The European Union.
Mr. Cilliers, I would have loved to have more time on this because so much, this story has got so many layers to it. And thank you so much for joining us, though. We do appreciate your time and your insights.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Well, Jakkie Cilliers is the head of the African Futures and Innovation at the Institute for Security Studies, helping us get insights into the political and the diplomatic complexities surrounding South Africa's role in the DRC conflict and the broader Great Lakes region, as well as the current challenges faced by peacekeeping forces.